Welcome everyone to another edition of Drunk Agile. 3 weeks in a row.
Yeah. How do we do this?
I don't know, it's
It's
magic.
incredible. Inconceivable.
It's magic. Nisha, thanks for joining us. Prateek, thanks for
Yep.
joining us. Hint, we're all
Yes, you
drinking
can
the
see the
same.
teeth.
You
See the
can?
teeth.
Oh,
Yeah, it's like,
that's a good
yeah,
night. That's a good
yeah.
night when you can see the teeth. We're wearing the same stuff, we're drinking the same stuff. So we won't bore you with those details. But the detail we will bore you with is there a while ago, I know a week or two ago, there was a discussion on the Pro Kanban Slack community about capacity and agile teams. So, if you're doing Scrum, if you're doing Kanban, if you're doing whatever, how do you figure out the capacity of your team? And that is the C word that we talked about in the last episode that Prateek kept mentioning. And so we figured we'd take this episode to talk a little bit more about what do we mean when we say WIP limits and capacity. So Prateek, take it away.
Yeah. Just to add a little more color to that discussion, it was about figuring out when is a team over capacity or when is a team under capacity for an agile team. And fun enough, this is exactly what your WIP limits are supposed to do. If you have a system where you've established WIP limits or some way of controlling WIP, that way of controlling WIP is meant to tell you if you're way over capacity, if the team is overburdened because they're working on too many things, or if you're way under capacity and the team is starved for work, if you're way under that WIP. That is exactly what that WIP limit is supposed to tell you.
Yeah, because I don't want to insult anybody if this is the way that you were taught or this is the way you practice because you were taught this way. But when people say things like in Scrum, velocity tells you your capacity, that sounds very, very strange to a flow ear. I don't even know how to process that statement. It makes absolutely no. Your velocity tells you your capacity. No, your capacity is how many things you can work on at any given time. And the only way, this is what you were talking about, the only way that you know that you can start new work is if the amount of things that you're working on right now is under that stated capacity. That's the signal we keep talking about. Okay, yeah, we can now pull something new in. Not that, hey, we did 12 PBIs last week, so we can do 12 PBIs this week. That's not what capacity means.
And especially when we were talking about whether teams are, because this is I think capacity gets used in two different ways, and the discussion was actually in a very positive way about how do we find out whether teams are overburdened or underburdened. That the other capacity discussion is usually how much capacity does this team have so we can plan out their next 6 years of work, which I'm glad this was not the discussion. The discussion was how do we figure out if the team was overburdened or underburdened? Um, Using whether it's throughput or velocity or whatever for that is it's giving you, in my opinion, one, the wrong signal because those things naturally vary, and two, it's giving you too late a signal. Um, let's talk about the first one. There is a lot of natural variation, whether it's velocity or throughput. You have to put all that stuff into something like a process behavior chart to actually figure out if there was something out of bounds. So that's not really that great a signal. That's why WIP is probably a better place to go. The second one being um, that it is actually retrospective or way after the fact that you're looking at this stuff. Um, that's a discussion we kind of started having just before we got on this. So then, do you want to say something about why WIP might be a better thing to look at than historical data?
I'll let you do that because I wanted to make it just a very, very quick comment because I was just thinking about I don't know if you remember, it was shortly after we first started working together, and I don't want to say argument, but not us. It was a heated discussion with one of the directors we were working with, because he came in and he said, hey, well, this team did X amount of stories
Oh yeah,
last month, so that means that they should do X amount of stories this month, right? And he had absolutely no concept of that natural variation that you were talking about, right? I mean, there is going to be variation in that throughput data, and it's potentially very, very significant variation. And that's not bad. That's just your process telling you, hey, this is kind of routine. This is kind of normal. Whole different blog series, drunk agile series, whatever, on that topic. But yeah, I was just thinking about that, this whole idea of thinking, well, because we did so much in the past, that's how much we should plan for in the future from a capacity perspective. Just really how deeply flawed that thinking is. So anyway, back to you. You finished the point that you were trying to make. Sorry, I didn't mean.
Yeah. So the point I was trying to make was the great thing with something like work in progress, and it's like looking at those is you don't have to wait for an iteration to have ended or multiple iterations to have ended to go back and look at this stuff. You can do it just in time. You can do it continuously. And I'm gonna steal what Dan says about a bunch of this stuff is if you want continuous development, if you want continuous integration, if you want to do all this stuff continuously, why don't you want a process that works continuously? And that's where we want to move more and more towards, rather than looking at things retrospectively after a few months or a few iterations, whatever that is. We want to look at things continuously and use something like WIP limits to figure out right now which team is overburdened or which team is underburdened, whatever that is.
Yeah, it's not to spark some huge Scrum debate on the comment section, although I'd maybe like to see it. But imagine you get really good at Scrum, and you're able, let's say you're doing 2-week sprints, and you're able to hit your sprint goal on the 4th day of the sprint. Now what? Now what do you do? I mean, I certainly have my thoughts, and I'm sure Scrum trainers out there would have kind of a Scrum by the book what you should be doing, but to me it's kind of obvious what you would do. And were you going to say something?
I was going to say I have not received a consistent answer to that question every time I've asked it. So I would love, and again, I do not claim to be a Scrum expert, so I would love some answers to, okay, what do I do if again, because of the natural variation of how things get done, not because we super undercommitted, but just because of natural variation. We got the goal accomplished in 4 to 5 days, and a sprint was supposed to be 20 days. What do I do for the next 15 days? Do I pull in new stuff? Do I say the sprint is done and I start a new sprint? Do I just do maintenance work? What do I do at that point? I would love to find out what people's opinions are. Yeah.
And this may sound like a tangent, but the point is, if your system is signaling that you have capacity to do work, the flow answer to that problem is start new work. You just, if you've got that signal that you have capacity, you just, independent of any goal, independent of any arbitrary sprint boundary, independent of any process framework that you're using, right? If your system is signaling you have capacity, you start new work. That's what you do. Take that to its logical conclusion, and it's like, every individual item that you're working on really should kind of be its own goal, right? I mean, it should be independently valuable on its own, such that when you deliver it, you've achieved something. Do we necessarily need an overarching goal for the next 2 weeks or 30 days? Or can we work in this more continuous goal setting? Can we have continuous goals? Something to think about. I'm not saying you should do that. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that, but I'm saying it's an interesting thought experiment, if you were to carry that through to its logical conclusion.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those things of, if you want to go look at the last episode again, it's this thing of your WIP limits are when your team works optimally. So that essentially is the quote unquote capacity of the team at any given moment, which tells you whether you're overburdened or underburdened. So use that if you're working optimally, you will most likely hit your goals in an optimal way.
Right. One final thing, because we are drinking, and so we are supposed to just kind of ramble on at this point.
We are.
Because this came up in a conversation I was having today, as a matter of fact. I mean, think about, wow, this whole episode sounds like we're Scrum bashing, and I guess maybe we kind of are, but we're not. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying that Scrum is bad, but I am saying if you're doing Scrum, there's certain things that you need to consider. Think how expensive it is. I mean, just completely how expensive it is to empty out your whole system and then fill it back up, and do that on a consistent basis on purpose every couple of weeks. That's transactionally, that's really, really expensive from a flow perspective, from a predictability perspective, from a stability perspective. It's almost impossible to recover from that. So yeah, anyway. Capacity, continuous, these are all good C words that you should be.
Yeah, it's like static friction and rolling friction. If you keep rolling, the friction is a lot lower. If you keep moving, as opposed to starting and stopping, you have a lot more friction to overcome.
I'm going to pretend
Physics.
I know what you're talking. Yeah.
Physics,
Whatever.
people. Okay.
Yeah. I think it would have been better
with physics.
You would have just said inertia. Maybe that would have been better if you would have just said
yeah.
Okay. Anyway,
yeah.
Whenever we start talking physics, we know that's our signal that it's the end of the episode. Okay. Even Nisha's like, please guys, like, shut up. All right. Shut up. For Nisha, for Prateek, I'm Daniel. Thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment. If you agreed with this discussion, if you didn't, please leave us a comment, and we will address that comment either in either next week or some future episode. So we will see you in the next episode. Thanks, everyone.